Welcome, everyone, to the very first episode of Jack Amplified. I'm your host, Michael Braithwaite. I have the great pleasure of being the CEO and president at Jack.org. And what does that mean? Well, that means I'm the least important person at the organization. The people on the front lines delivering our programs are doing the heavy lifting. Let's be honest. I'm so glad you're joining us for this important conversation. So we are launching this podcast today, right before World Mental Health Day, to raise awareness, but more importantly, it's to inspire action, man. We could talk a lot, but it's action that matters. And at Jack.org, we believe that belonging is prevention. So when young people feel connected, included, and supported in their communities, they're better able to take care of their mental health and look out for one another. And that's what we're all about, is youth looking out for youth, that pure connection. In today's episode, we're going to dig into what belonging really means, why it's such a powerful protective factor for youth mental health, and how we can all play a role in creating spaces where young people feel they belong. I'm not going to talk on my own, obviously. I'm sure you're already bored in the first minute. This is Youth for Youth, so each week we have awesome guests who are brilliant and courageous and sharing their own stories and their own thoughts. And this week is no different. Our very first guest, who's very courageous to come on as our first guest, I am joined by the amazing Samarah Maqbool. Samarah is a Jack.org network youth. She's very passionate about youth mental health, which you will see for sure, equity informed practices, and creating diverse ways of teaching and learning. Now, if it looks like I'm reading, I kind of am, right? Because I want to get this right. Samarah deserves that. She also brings a deep personal perspective as a South Asian older sister and daughter of immigrants navigating life in the West. Samarah thrives in community-engaged work and has a very unique way of blending cultural and personal insights into conversations about belonging and mental health. And outside of her advocacy, like she has more time, she finds joy in grounding through sewing, knitting, and biking. What a well-rounded individual. That's amazing. Samarah, thank you so much for being here and kicking off our very first episode.
What an introduction. Thank you so much for having me here, Michael. I'm so excited.
Hey, listen, it is People Make Podcasts, and I think this one's going to be incredible. So let's talk about World Mental Health Day coming up. What does that mean to you personally?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I feel like when I was thinking about World Mental Health Day and what exactly it means to me, I feel like it breaks down into almost two branches. The first branch I feel like is a bit more of internal and reflecting on myself and the changes that I've made, mistakes I've made, how I learned from them and how I've grown from them over time. And just being mindful and having gratitude for that, as well as externally thinking of my personal communities, whether that's my social circles, like my families and friends, or my professional communities. I am a student. So how I interact with those, not only how they impact me, but how I have the chance to impact them as well in a mutual way. And of course, as it is World Mental Health Day, I don't think we can ignore anything such as the ways that factors that impact people around the world and their mental health. I have the privilege of having a roof under my head, being able to have clean food every single day. And there are people who are facing wars and genocides in places such as, obviously, to name a few, can't even name all of them, but Palestine, Sudan, Congo, can't ignore those. Um, and knowing that, they have communities there and climate justice, political unrest, and other factors all tie in with mental health. It's not something that's looked at in isolation.
No, man, it's such a good point. When we think, it's quite often we're trapped in our own little bubble, right? We're our silos, and this is our space, and that's okay. I think that's pretty normal. But when you're talking about, and I think of yourself as a young person in this world, and you go through any newsreel right now, and it is just dire. There's no good news sprinkled in there about what's happening in this world around violence, corruption, political unrest, climate change, just all the pressures facing youth right now. It's a tough time to be a young person in this world, and in different parts of the world even tougher, as you say. But everyone's journey is their journey. Let's talk about your background a little bit and how that's shaped the way you see mental health, teaching, and learning.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite questions. I love talking about myself and my background, so that's perfect. um, but to give a bit more context, as Michael shared, I am South Asian. My parents are Pakistani, and I feel like in Desi culture, it's very common to value collectivism. Growing up in Canada, it's so interesting seeing the switch between, behaviors and things that I would think of as normal at home and how those things aren't maybe typically accepted or as common. Um, Growing up in the West. Some examples that I think of are, like if I'm struggling or having a hard time, I feel a lot more comfortable asking those questions, reaching out, and relying on other people. And if there is a problem that I'm facing, I know that I don't have to face it alone. And I feel comfortable, checking in with my parents or my two sisters or my friends. And asking a couple more questions when I don't really know how to approach something on my own. And realizing that that isn't the norm for everybody was a very much jarring experience, but pushed me to kind of encourage others to learn about, collectivism and how we can be together rather than struggling alone. In addition to that, I did mention I am a sister. So I have an older sister and a younger sister. So I get the best of both worlds as a middle child. I'm lucky enough to be able to learn from the experiences of my older sister, ask her questions. She's like my built-in survival guide, basically. And then my younger sister, I have the chance to also share my experiences for those moments where she seems like she's in my shoes. And it's almost like a cyclical form of mentorship, which I really appreciate. In general, I also feel like I get the chance to carry that forward to my professional spheres as a teaching assistant, as a student, as a peer, and how I can foster those same communities or that same environment in the classroom. And one last thing, I am a Muslim person. I wear a hijab, and thinking about those factors of faith and knowing that things will be okay, I feel like for me personally, when there are moments of struggle and I am feeling uncertain or there are anxious voices in my head, that thought of, things will be okay and there is a way of how the world works out and how things play out, especially in my life, gives me that assurance that I don't necessarily need to know what every single next moment in front of me will look like.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, I've talked over the years. I've worked with many young people, and they talk about sometimes with different cultural backgrounds that kind of push pull of, Western society, and then they go home and the traditional versus trying to balance that
Mhm.
out, right? And sometimes how tough it can be because you're bombarded at school with here's kind of my norm versus the norm at home, and trying to find middle ground sometimes within that can be a challenge
Right.
and put pressure on you too, right?
Oh, for sure.
So let's talk about Jack.org. Our lane that we work in is really early intervention prevention, right? Because the idea that the organization was born out of, if your friends and if this network around you, this kind of ecosystem around everyone had a little more understanding around mental health, and we can normalize and reduce the stigma and have these conversations, maybe we don't elevate to a point of crisis. And if you get to that, you know how to navigate that and move forward, right? And that's summing up Jack.org pretty quick. But let's talk a little bit about prevention. Why do you think belonging is such an important part of prevention?
To me, I think when I have the chance to connect with other people and I feel that sense of belonging, I don't have the chance to almost fall into that period where I'm struggling a bit more and I have a bit more of a harder time. But when I have those other individuals around me, my community, my circle, thinking of my housemates when I'm living in Hamilton or um, my friends that are ready on speed dial for FaceTime when something comes up or I have a quick question, or my parents also being so available, which is such a privilege to have. And that sense of, is do you like almost that question of do you feel that experience too? And hearing a yes is so validating. And I think to me that's almost the idea of belonging, that reassurance that you're not by yourself. And I think with mental health struggles, one of the biggest things is that you feel like you are alone in this experience and there isn't really anyone you can reach out to. So I do feel like belonging is that chance to bridge that connection.
Well, it's huge, right? But you're so
Mhm.
right. In the moment, you feel I'm the only person in the world right now that, you know,
Exactly.
and it's not logical. Like it's, obvious, but the minute someone else says, especially like someone of the same age or someone you can relate to, right?
Mhm.
It's something relatable. And so I have to say, like, and parents get frustrated. Like, well, I tell my kids that, but you're not relatable, right? At the same age, or they can't see at the time. But for a
Mhm.
friend to say, yeah, man, like I feel that way too. I'm scared sometimes, or I'm anxious, or I feel so down sometimes. It's hard to get. And you say, yeah, I feel you. I know what you're saying. Like, you're right. Then it's the belonging. Okay. There's more
Yeah,
than
it's so
I'm not
funny,
alone.
sorry, that you mentioned that, Michael, when you speak about, like, the relatable aspect, because I can literally think of experiences in my head where it's either a parent or a professional or someone who has given me some piece of suggestion or advice, and as soon as someone who's another youth has given me that same piece of advice, I feel like it holds a lot more weight just knowing that they've been in the same or they're actively going through the same experience I am. So I thought it was so funny when you mentioned that.
It's true, and I think for
Mhm.
many parents, even it's aside from parents, I think people go through that with their partners, where the partners, okay,
Mhm.
totally told you the same thing, but it's different sometimes where it comes from, the relatable piece of maybe it's a friend or someone. Again, it's being able to relate, not taking that personally. And as a parent, at the end of the day, who cares as long as that person you care about is getting the support they need and has multiple people around them belonging, pulling them in and making sure that they're not alone, which is so cool. Let's talk a little bit about Jack.org. First of all, I want to know, how did you first get connected to Jack.org? What's the connection there?
Oh my god, great question. I actually was first involved back in high school, which it feels like forever ago. I was a sophomore and I was actually a part of my Jack chapter.
Cool, cool. And so Jack, for people who are listening who like, Jack chapter, what's that? Tell me a little bit about what did your chapter do?
Yeah, I'll walk you through the full journey. So starting with chapters, they're similar. At my high school, it was similar to an extracurricular club. I was a bit curious and wanted to get involved and was had a lot of questions about what mental health was, and I thought, what better way could there be than to be involved? I had attended a couple of their events, made a couple of stress balls, and I was like, "Hey, like, I wanna try doing this thing myself." So, I had joined their executive team, and it gave me a chance to build a lot of skills. Obviously, like, hard skills, learning, like, how to build a budget and how to raise funds for these events that change, youth experience, especially in schools and other communities, but also actually having that connection and talking to other young people and getting them involved, and I think once I was empowered and I felt confident enough to share those facts that I had learned through my training, through my interactions, I was able to almost pay it forward and empower other youth. Whether that was encouraging them to also become part of a chapter, or even on a smaller scale, just maybe encouraging them to ask a couple of more questions on a reflective scale and to think a bit more about how they could support their own mental health or support the mental health of somebody else. Jack.org offers Be There. I think that is such a monumental tool that I carried with me through my chapters. One of the biggest questions I always had as a high school student, or I had with other peers as a high school student, was when someone's going through a hard time, what do you say? Or what do you do? And I think that Be There, with their golden rules and with their on their resource, they have examples and other tools, gives you such concrete methods to use and leverage, and helps you understand that when you're being there for someone, it's not necessarily like a one size fits all situation either, where you're just there for someone and you call it a day and you move on. But it is really a long term, almost maintenance type of process while recognizing your own capacity. To continue a bit more with my journey, I wasn't only a part of chapters. I had graduated high school and obviously could no longer be a part of my chapter, but I still wanted to be a part of the mental health movement somehow. And my program coordinator had suggested I join Jack Talks. Believe it or not, I was not a big fan of public speaking before. Um, but she encouraged me to give it a shot. And if I didn't like it, I could step away. And I actually really enjoyed it. I found that thinking of those experiences where I was speaking one-on-one with other youth in chapters, this was a similar experience, just on a little bit of a larger scale, and there was still that opportunity to get that direct engagement where you could see how your audience was feeling and resonate with them on a deeper level based on your lived experiences. It gave me a chance to speak to my community on a larger scale. I have been a Jack Talk speaker since 2021 and love recertifying every single year and having the chance to go across the GTA where I'm from and speak to youth and young people who look like me, who don't look like me, who have had my experiences, who maybe haven't had my experiences, and not only share my story, but hear back from them. It's those little moments at the end of talks that I feel like really fuel me to continue doing this type of work, where they share like, "Hey, like, I actually have a question about like the university transition process. I'm in grade 11 and I'm the first person of my family who's like thinking of applying to university. Like, what are the next steps? How do I even navigate that?" And, you know, letting them know like how my experience was and being able to walk through that together was really fulfilling. And I have been a part of talks and chapters, and with that, it gave me the chance to also later on be involved as a network representative, now known as the Youth Voice Council, and think about those on the grounds experiences I had with talks and chapters and share it on a national scale and bring those forward to people who are at the decision making table who are considering how those programs can continually improve, especially for marginalized communities, and bring those voices forward. So remember how I was talking about those people who had experiences like mine or didn't have experiences like mine. I had the privilege of carrying all of those perspectives together to a table that could actually think about, for example, aspects of the talk that could be more equitable and inclusive, or aspects of chapters that could also include a bigger community. And I found that so, so fulfilling, and I'm so grateful to continue being a part of it.
And we're grateful that you continue to be a part of it. I mean, every aspect of Jack.org you've been involved in. And it's, I mean, it's a lot of pressure to be one of, I think, was it 30 voices that are representing, or 13, I think, around across
13,
Canada, right?
yes.
Like, and again, it's a snapshot, it's a segment, but you're an
Oh, for
important voice
sure.
there for sure. And I'll tell you this too, is that we do hear you, right? And so now, of course, we're exploring, when you talk about vulnerable populations, how do we get some of that Jack.org programming to youth experiencing homelessness, youth in the criminal justice system, youth coming out of child welfare systems? How do we get adults who daily are working with youth to that ecosystem, again, building that up around them, whether it be teachers, police officers, librarians, I mean, TTC workers, if you're from Toronto, all those different people. So we're trying to increase the impact, get out to those who are most in need as well. And that includes, of course, Black and Indigenous communities. And the
Of
team has
course.
done an incredible job of doing that. So listen, if you could share one call to action, just one, there's many for listeners today around, of course, mental health, what would it be?
I literally spent the entire morning trying to decide how I could narrow it down to one call to action. I think the one thing that I could say is just thinking about community, whether that's your own community, whether that's a community that is on like a local scale, regional scale, provincial scale, maybe it's a community across the world, and reflect on how you can take action to foster a bit more community with them. An example I want to give, because I feel like that's a very vague statement on its own, is for me, community exists beyond like physical space. We're a digital community. Me and you, Michael, right here are a community, and fostering a digital community through social media is now something that has become so huge and a possibility that didn't exist before, especially for young people. And for me, something as simple as either creating a post on my story or sharing a voice of somebody else on my story of, a graphic or a cause that's important to me was something that I didn't realize was, a part of building and fostering community. I'm speaking to my community and understanding how I can build more belonging with them, more understanding with them, and sharing my thoughts and my perspective and feeling comfortable with that. And I know that not everyone is necessarily comfortable sharing thoughts on social media of their own, but if someone else has put it in a greatly worded way, that's a perfect opportunity to share that with someone else, either through a message or on your story.
One wonderfully said. Um, we're going to go into one final segment. And so I want to introduce uh, listeners to a reoccurring segment that you'll be hearing through this season of Jack Amplified. It is called From the Front Lines. So in this segment, we ask our guests to share a personal story of experience from the front lines of youth mental health, something connected to the theme each episode. It's a way to ground our conversation in lived experience and highlight what these ideas look like in real time. So, Samarah, I'd love for you to share your From the Front Lines story with us.
Sure. I think the experience I want to share is one that a lot of young people may be able to relate to. I was thinking about when I first got accepted to university to start my Bachelor's of Life Sciences at McMaster University. I was very excited. I was very stoked, but I quickly realized that it meant that my typical supports, such as my parents, my sisters, my friends from my hometown, would no longer be in my circle because I'd be moving. And it sounds so silly when I say it out loud, but from Mississauga, Ontario to Hamilton, Ontario. And for those of you that don't know, it's maybe not more than like a 45-minute drive if you have good traffic. But to me, that was a really big change because I was so used to everybody being within arm's reach. And as a result, I knew I would be moving out and I had prepared accordingly and I had moved in. And I noticed in those first couple of weeks, it was a lot of change at once. I thought it was just academic change, but there was the minute geographical change, there was the social change, the change in environment, the change in the commitments I had going on. I had previously been working in my hometown and I could no longer work there because I wasn't physically there anymore. And as a result, I still also wanted to be involved in university, so I tried to join extracurriculars because I learned about the importance of being involved early on. And personally, I was looking to fund and finance my education, so I had taken on part-time work as well.
Right.
And very quickly, I realized that this was a lot, and I found myself having to try and make decisions between going to a lecture or going to a club meeting or making sure that I could meet my work shifts, but then also having class assignments due at midnight. And I became overwhelmed very fast. And at some point, it felt easier to just not have to make any decisions at all, quote unquote, by just sitting in almost an indecisive state and just withdrawing. And I didn't realize that it was unhealthy at the time, but to me, it seemed like the easy way out because everyone else seemed like they had it figured out, and I couldn't make any decisions. I didn't know who to talk to because my friends were at different universities, my parents were at home, my sisters are also going through different life stages, so it didn't really feel like there was anyone who could really relate to my experience. One thing I didn't mention though is when I had moved to Hamilton, I was also living with 6 housemates who are now my best friends, but at the time were strangers. And I think of the time where I was a bit withdrawn and in my room and not as engaged with anybody yet. And one of them had knocked on my door. She opened it, I opened the door and she was like, "Hey, like I noticed like we had shared a fridge and she noticed that my shelf in the fridge was a little bit empty. And she was like, "Hey, do you wanna just go grocery shopping together?" And I was like, "Sure, why not?" We had gone on a walk, we went grocery shopping, and there, she kind of nudged me a little bit to say, like, you know, "What's going on? How are you feeling? How have the first couple of weeks been?" And I feel like that one question was the gateway to just everything opening up. I was able to share, you know, like, "I'm having quite a hard time. I'm feeling so homesick despite not being that far away." And it feels like everyone knows what's going on, and I feel like I've overcommitted to too many things, and there are just a lot of things going on. And I feel like, you know, I'm having a hard time with my schoolwork and my assessments and staying on top of things. And she said, "Hey, like, I hear you. I'm also a first year student. I'm going through the same thing." And she had asked me about different resources and if I had heard about them, such as the school's wellness center, and that there are accommodations available for students who might need a bit more support finding that balance. And with that, she had offered to set up that first appointment with me. And with that, I would have never had known that I needed accommodations for university or known that there were other opportunities to seek support in a more professional manner. And I'm so grateful to her and the rest of my housemates that I lived with, during my undergrad degree because I felt like that one trip and, like, those that one experience opened up so many future conversations, opened up so many more knocking on the doors and late night conversations and opportunities to just be vulnerable and share a bit more, especially with those who have the same lived experiences as you. And with that, I think the main key message that I wanna share is that it only takes that one experience, whether you might be that one person who's experiencing that yourself and someone asks that question, it's a chance to share, or if you notice somebody else having a bit of that hard time, it might just take that one little probe of, "Hey, like, what's going on? Everything okay?" Or, like, "How are you feeling about XYZ?" To just spark a bit more conversation, and think about the different resources that you might be exposed to. And some other people, like myself, had never heard of those things before. So just sharing and being open and okay with not knowing what the next step is. And for example, with counseling, I was able to talk about setting boundaries for myself and stepping away from those commitments that I had in university that maybe weren't exactly fueling me in the way that they needed to, or having a conversation with my supervisor about how my hours could be better managed with my current semester schedule based on the winter semester. And as well as thinking about my course load and how that could be also appropriately changed so that I could make the best use of my days and think about, like different tools I could use to optimize my time and also just feel better about, hanging out with friends or doing things for myself, like having a chance to ride my bike around Hamilton. So those little things were all personally, I feel like were sparked by that one conversation, and it opened up to gradually over time exploring hobbies, exploring other opportunities to learn about myself and learn about others. And I I don't think like without that and with that that wouldn't have necessarily happened. And like I do have my family and I still have my sisters in my corner who give me the opportunity to seek solace in them when there are situations where I feel like they are the most relatable. For example, with my sisters, if there's something that's culturally relevant, with my parents too. But I think in that moment, being a student, just having another student who was in those same shoes,
Yeah.
was monumental.
Yeah, the grocery shopping was the arbitrary part, right? It wasn't about that, but that was the lure to get you out of the house to start the conversation. So what are those
Exactly.
conversation starters that could open that door, right? And just kind of
Mhm.
give you the space to have the conversation like you did. Incredible. Thank you for sharing. So, you have been such a wonderful first guest. I've taken up a lot of your time. And as you demonstrated here, you're a very busy person. So, I have a final question. This is a reoccurring question that we're going to ask all guests this season. And it's a big one, though. And that's just, and this is personal to everyone. There's no right or wrong. And that is, what are your hopes for the future of youth mental health in Canada?
So I think my hopes are that people continue putting mindfulness and empathy at the forefront of all of their initiatives and everything they do. I think it's like we said, it's or like I was thinking it's easier said than done, but I think that in a digital world like we were talking about earlier, Michael, there are so many posts and it's very easy to fall into almost like a spiral sort of experience where it does feel like there nothing is going to change and there is no, you know, next steps, but remembering that it takes one person, one experience, thinking of my personal lived experience with mental health and well-being, um, thinking about how one interaction can make a big change is something that's really key, whether that's, in the digital space, like we talked about with my call to action, just making a post, opening a question, posing a conversation. I urge people to do a bit more of that. I think after COVID especially, it's felt very intimidating to be open and be expressive, whether that's in person or digitally. But I think that one, I guess, step of like putting yourself outside your comfort zone. For me, it was like public speaking and becoming a Jack Talk speaker, and now being here on this podcast. It's a step of events I would have never expected happen so many years ago. But I think that those little steps of, you know, being a youth and remembering that you have the chance to represent those around you, whether they're similar to you or not, um, is something that I want to push for and like continue for in the future. A lot of change for young people is made by young people. So just continuing that aspect.
And that's how it should be. By young people, for young people. Absolutely. Well, listen, I want to thank you. This brings us to the end of the first episode. Congratulations of Jack Amplified. A huge, heartfelt thank you to you for your vulnerability, for your courage, for your enthusiasm and energy. I feel that I am so sure when you give a Jack talk, that room is just energized, right? And ready to talk more and more and more. And you feel that coming through. So thank you so much for sharing your story, your lived experience. It's so appreciated.
No, thank you, Michael, for also like creating a space like this and giving young people like me the chance to share my experiences, my thoughts, my qualms, my random asides. I loved every moment of it. So thank you.
Fantastic. Well, listen, if there's one thing to take away, it's that belonging is not just a nice to have, it's a powerful force for prevention and a cornerstone of youth mental health. So each of us, as you talked about too, has a role in creating communities where young people feel seen, supported, and connected. And we talked about belonging here today. To learn more about Jack.org and how you can get involved, visit Jack.org. I mean, it's in the name. It's really easy to remember. And don't forget to follow Jack Amplified wherever you get your podcast. Share it widely. Let's share these stories, these voices, and we'll get the conversations going. We'll get them continued and moving forward. Till next time, I'm Michael Braithwaite. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
See you. Thank you.